And welcome back, fellow football fanatics. This is College Football with Sam. And I kind of have to catch my breath as just ran up the stairs to get to the studio. But here we are, and we're going to be discussing 5 games tonight. And also, I was sick last week. I'm still a little bit under the weather now, but good enough to make videos and go live and talk to you guys about this wonderful sport. But last week I was not. Last week I was pretty ill, had a really nasty cough, and as a result I couldn't really do the proper justice that I wanted to for the Indiana-Oregon game. So it is a week late, but Oregon and Indiana fans, honestly, if you look at your schedules, you don't have much to look forward to, at least for these next handful of weeks. You just don't. I mean, Oregon plays Wisconsin this Saturday, then they get a bye, and then they travel to Iowa. That's going to be a game I'm going to be paying very close attention to, is the Oregon-Iowa game. Same with the Oregon-Washington game. For Indiana, the only game remaining on their schedule that I think is worth paying attention to, outside of this one against UCLA, is probably going to be against Maryland on the road and Penn State on the road. And again, that's after this Saturday. So I want to give a little bit of some of my additional takeaways from Indiana and Oregon and the game that they played within the context of how they did last Saturday and through a analytical viewpoint too, because these are two of the best teams in football. And then you add an Ohio State and Alabama, and I think you have tier one. So that's really the agenda, along with, at the end, towards the end, talking about some Penn State coaching candidates. I have a array of names that I want to share with you. Just very briefly going over those names in this episode, probably in a future segment, maybe next week, I'll go a little bit into more detail about some of the names I provided and why I think they should be contacted, or why they could work, or why maybe it's likely they'll come to Happy Valley. Again, I'm not someone who claims to be connected to any coaches or any universities. I'm just trying to piece together the puzzle pieces that I can find through the fog of war, if that makes sense. So make sure to subscribe, make sure to like the channel, like the video, comment your thoughts down below. Again, we are live Monday, Wednesday, and Sunday. Try to be around 6 p.m. Eastern time, aren't always there. But as there are some developments going on behind the scenes with the channel, the in-video graphics change, I think, signifies that we're working to be better each and every week and be the best college football channel that there is. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I want to start off discussing UCLA, Indiana, the big noon game, big noon on Fox, which is pretty funny to me because UCLA is going to be kicking off at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 9 a.m. local time for them. It's just like the networks are talking about how sweet UCLA's story is, and then Fox decides to give them the bird by forcing them to, this is outside of UCLA's control. Not only do they have to play an Indiana team who, coincidentally in the history of Indiana, is perhaps their best team ever fielded in school history, they have to do it on the road. Yeah, still under the weather a bit, but that's okay. UCLA has to do it on the road, and they have to kick off at 9 a.m. their time, while Indiana gets to kick off at a time that they're pretty familiar with. They've played in several noon games, several early games throughout the history of the Big Ten. But UCLA is on a 3-game win streak, and Cignetti is saying that him and his team are really paying attention to UCLA since Tim Skipper became the head coach. So they're looking at UCLA from really the lens of their conference schedule, where they are a 3-1 team in Big Ten Conference play, ironically tied for 3rd in conference standings. The UCLA Bruins take a long trip from Los Angeles, from the Rose Bowl, all the way out to Memorial Stadium in Bloomington, Indiana, and they will be kicking off at 9 a.m. local time. Very unfamiliar spot and location for a UCLA team that has been red hot, beating Penn State and coming off a win last Saturday over Maryland and also beating Michigan State. They've beaten those three teams in a row. One of them on the road in a familiar time zone where they're going to be playing this Saturday, the Eastern time zone, and two at home against a Maryland and Penn State team that analytically were thought to be great when they entered the Rose Bowl, and UCLA beat them up. Indiana is ranked second nationally. They're the only team outside of Ohio State with first place votes right now in the EP poll. They're 7-0, tied for first with the Ohio State Buckeyes. They're favored by 24.5 points. Again, this game will be broadcasted on Fox. You'll have Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt calling this game. Can't wait for them to act like these two teams are on an even playing field here. This is not to throw shade or disrespect at UCLA, who we're going to be talking about first, but let's be real here. UCLA is the inferior team. So if they're going to win, they have to have things go right. They have to take advantage of some weaknesses that Indiana has shown, if any, and they have to not get down on themselves because they are going to be facing adversity. And the good news is with UCLA is whether it's against Northwestern, where they lost 14-17, Penn State, where they were up big at half 27-7, but they had to hold on to win 42-37, or Maryland at home, where they won 20-17, they have played in close games. They have faced adversity. And in recent memory, throughout the month of October, they've come on top of that adversity. That's why, despite having a 3-4 record, they're 3-1 in Big Ten Conference play. Technically, they still have a path to Indy in the college football playoff, even though I think even the most biased UCLA fan will admit along with me that'll never happen. But the fact it's mathematically possible is hilarious for a team that's 65th in FPI, 68th in S&P+, and over the last 3 games, they're actually the top 50 of points per play margin. In the overall grand scheme of things, they're once again outside the top 60 in a critical dominance metric. UCLA is really strong at running the football. They have impressed me there, where they earn 0.15 EPA per rush. That's 15th. You can thank Nico Iamaleava, Javion Thomas, Jalen Berger, some of the other running backs that they have. Ever since they made that change at head coach, going from Deshaun Foster to Tim Skipper, and they made some other they shuffled the staff around a bit, they've been a very effective rushing offense. They're averaging 5.63 yards per carry with a 42.6 rushing success rate. It's actually a 44% rushing success rate. I was reading UConn's. UConn's also done a very impressive job. But for UCLA, they have had a knack for finding big runs and getting Nico involved in that ground game. One thing Indiana has been weak at, and this was exposed against Old Dominion, they've kind of clamped down on it ever since. QB runs really work that team, and I don't exactly know why that is, but Old Dominion ripped off 2 75-yard QB runs against them. Aiden Childs had a rush of, I think, 60 yards against the Hoosiers in a game where otherwise Indiana absolutely dominated the lines of scrimmage. Maybe UCLA, if Nico is willing to sacrifice his body, and he has been willing, capable, and wanting to do that to help will UCLA to victories recently, maybe they can find some points here. Also, you got to look at the fact that Indiana is still a team that operates with a highly effective passing attack with their RPO, and passing is their strength. They're also very strong at running, but not as strong. If UCLA can find a way to stop the run at a more effective rate than they have recently, I think that their secondary maybe, just maybe, can have a great day, and that can help them keep it closer, maybe pull off the upset. The problem is for UCLA, their rushing offense is very unproductive, or rushing defense, rather. The offense is inconsistent overall, especially in the passing attack. They really struggle to throw the football. Nico Iamaleava is definitely a dual-threat quarterback. He does have some arm talent, but at UCLA, the reason why the Bruins have been on a 3-game win streak, I think, has a lot more to do with his legs and how they are utilizing that in tandem with the running backs than him necessarily balling out in the passing game. So the Bruins have a tall and tough task ahead of them, to say the least. As for Indiana, I do not believe the Hoosiers for a minute are overlooking what UCLA has done in recent memory. Indiana is a well-coached team. They are among, I think, the best teams in America. They could be the best team in America. I think unanimously they are the best coached team in America. You want to tell me Ohio State and Oregon and Alabama and Georgia have phenomenal coaching? Notre Dame, not really. Texas, as much as I want to say it. Defensively, Texas has good coaching. I will listen to all of those, but all of those teams have dramatically more talent than Indiana does. So the fact that Indiana is in a conversation with those teams means either for an entire group of collegiate players, someone misevaluated them, or the staff was able to develop them and put them in positions to win. I think it's more likely to be the latter than the former. The fact that they went into Kinnick Stadium when Gronowski was, I think, having an overall good game, and they really shut down Iowa's rushing attack in a way no one else could, and they emerged with a win over a gritty, tough Iowa team. The fact that they beat Oregon by 2 scores on the road, that they crushed Michigan State while having a very slow start, and Michigan State was able to eat up a bunch of clock early. They blew out Illinois, and they dominated the non-conference. Even the Old Dominion game where they won by 13, it was 7-0 Old Dominion early, and then Indiana went on a 27-0 run and left, honestly, 10 to 17 or maybe even up to 21 points off the board in scoring. This is one of the best teams in college football. It's one of the better Big Ten teams over the past 2 seasons, past 3 seasons, and it's probably the best team in Indiana school history. Would I be incorrect in saying that? I know we're only 7 games in here, but they are 7th in points per play. They're 8th in points allowed per play. I think they are number 1 in success rate margin. They're number 3 in points per play margin. They have over a 10% havoc rate margin where they don't allow a bunch of negative plays. They don't give up the football that much. They don't give up many sacks or TFLs, and they force offenses to go through that hell all the time. They have upgraded at literally every position compared to where they were last year. They are better on the offensive line, wide receiver, tight end, running back, quarterback, D-line, linebacker, safety, corner, special teams. They are, in every facet, a better team than they were last year. Early on, I kind of thought that maybe Mendoza would have a higher ceiling than Rourke, but also a lower floor. It turns out he has a higher floor, too. I mean, he's more accurate, he's more poised. He has an NFL future as a starter, where Rourke has an NFL future and currently is in the NFL as a backup. When you're 3rd in FPI, 3rd in S&P Plus, you're 3rd in points per play margin, having beaten and rather controlled a team who's tied with Ohio State for 1st in points per play margin on the road, may I add. I start to think that, you're in that conversation for being a national champion. And if not for priors, and priors are very important, do not get this mistaken, if not for priors, Indiana would be the number 1 team in America. Don't get that part mistaken. They were power rated to begin the year so far behind Oregon and Ohio State and Penn State that it wasn't even funny. They were power rated behind Michigan and USC in most early metrics and power ratings. I preseason power rated Indiana top 10. I did. So I'm not surprised that Indiana is one of the best teams in America, but what I am surprised by is the fact that they are this good. I'm surprised that they exceeded even my expectations. And I was the highest person on Indiana preseason, at least from what I know. I was one of the only people who said this is at worst a top 10 team. And at one point I had them ranked top 5 in my mind. And I was really going back and forth like, this team is better than Clemson, and they might be better than Texas, and they might be better than Oregon and Ohio State. I was thinking that way. And I wish I stuck to it to a certain degree. And I, again, was never low on Indiana, but at one point, Indiana fans can probably attest to this too. I picked them to go into Autzen and win preseason, and I faded that. And I shouldn't have. This team is among the nation's elite. Relative to this year, they are an elite team, and maybe they will be so good that at the end of the year, we will look back on them as an elite team regardless of the season they played in. And that's why I can't pick UCLA to win this game, let alone cover. I know that Rick Neuheisel, the deacon of objectivity, it's pure sarcasm because he coached at UCLA. Like, of course he's going to pick UCLA to win. I know he picked UCLA. I think a lot of people are trending towards thinking UCLA is going to make this close. You do not understand how good of a team Indiana is. Indiana is one of the best teams in America. They are better in every facet compared to UCLA. They are tougher, they are bigger, they are stronger, they are more physical, they are better coached, and they are at home playing in a familiar time zone, not a few thousand miles away from their stadium. This game screams Indiana to win and win big. I don't think UCLA has any shot here. If Indiana was the type of team to overlook UCLA, if Indiana was the type of team that's 7-0 because they know how to win close games, they know how to be gimmicky, 2022 TCU or 2021 Michigan State, those type of teams, if that's what they were, then UCLA, I think, would be in prime position to play spoiler here. But Indiana's not one of those teams. Indiana has incurred blowout after blowout after blowout against their opponents, especially when they play at home in Memorial Stadium. So I think that is going to be more of the same here. Indiana will win, and Indiana will cover. And these teams are sitting currently towards the top of the Big Ten standings. If UCLA does somehow pull this win out, I would immediately hire Tim Skipper as the head coach of the program for the near and long-term future. I already would, regardless of the outcome of this game. He's done a very good job. The fact that UCLA is in the top half of Big Ten standings right now is nothing short of insane. And how he was able to pull that roster basically out of the grave after they got blown out by New Mexico was pretty impressive. For Indiana here, it seems like they have a red carpet to Indy. I know Curt Cignetti's not treating it that way, nor should he. But from an objective analyst's point of view, this team should go 12-0, and they should play against Ohio State for the Big Ten championship game, or maybe Oregon, because I don't think Indiana has any... Ohio State doesn't really have a uber challenging task left on their schedule in the sense of having to play an opponent of their level, but playing at Michigan in the final week of the season is a tougher task for Indiana than anything they actually have on their schedule. And Indiana doesn't have to make that trip. Ohio State does. So I'd actually say Indiana, out of all the teams in the Big Ten, is the highest likelihood of going to Indy. They have the head-to-head win over Oregon. Maybe Ohio State loses to Michigan. Maybe Oregon gets in. I think that Indiana, as long as they take care of business and don't overlook their opponents, has the red carpet path to the Big Ten championship game. Illinois and Washington's a bit of a different story. It's a bit of a different type of game. But it is important in the sense that, in theory, both of these... Bless me. Both of these teams technically are alive in their playoff hopes. 23rd ranked Illinois, 5-2, coming off of a bye with a 2-2 record in Big Ten play. Most recent game was a 34-16 loss to Ohio State. They're traveling to a Washington team who's returning home from a trip out to Michigan where they got pounded 24-7. And Michigan, honestly, watching that game, they left probably 17 points off the board. Washington left off 3. That game could have been so much worse. And Jed Fish said he didn't do an adequate job preparing his team for that game. Seems pretty similar to what Washington looked like against Ohio State, with the fake field goal and the debacle that was, and how once they got in the red zone, I know Ohio State's red zone defense is amazing, but it seems like Washington didn't believe in themselves. Well, now you're not playing Ohio State, who is the best team in America per the polls and definitely a top 3 or 4 team. You're not playing Michigan either, where you had to travel to the Big House, and they were a top 15, top 20 power-rated team. You're playing an Illinois team that is top 30, maybe top 25 best at power ratings at home. You should win this game. It's why you're 5.5-point favorites. If you are Illinois, you are 5-2. Your 2 losses are to an Indiana and Ohio State team who are top 2 in the rankings, top 4 at the very worst in the ratings. Indiana or Ohio State, same with Alabama, Oregon. I think of the argument to be anywhere from 4th to 1st in power ratings, not any lower, not any higher. To play 2 top 4 teams and get aced by both of them, there's not really any shame in that when you're Illinois. Win the rest of your games, you'll possibly be in the playoff conversation. You should win this game because Washington is in no way close to Indiana or Ohio State. They are not. Indiana would beat Washington by probably 40 points if they wanted to. Ohio State decided to turn on the game control, the burn clock feature in NCAA 14, and they beat them 24-6 while kind of being comatose on offense in the first and early second quarter. Let's start off talking about the Illini here. So Illinois, as I mentioned, fringe top 25 team. I think the 23rd ranking they have it's respectable. They're not totally overrated. They're certainly not underrated, I don't think. I mean, when you're 56th in points per play margin, 0.051 points per play margin, that means you only score about a 20th more of a point for one of your plays compared to one of your opponent's plays. It's not all that impressive. It's just not, especially when you have 5 wins. And the reasoning why Illinois has 5 wins with that low points per play margin is against teams that are not Ohio State or Indiana. They typically win the turnover battle. They usually are able to generate enough passing offense and rushing defense of their own to get ahead of their opponents and force their opponents to put themselves in situations where they generate turnovers. And then Illinois snowballs you by winning the turnover battle, by having a run game that kind of comes alive as the game goes on, and they out-physical you. But watching them play against Indiana, USC, Ohio State, I think that this team has some semblance of a good team, some aspects, but they also have other aspects that they're going to have to improve on out of the bye if they want any hope at beating a Washington team that is very good at generating explosive plays, both running and passing, similar to Indiana. And it's also a road game, just like that Indiana game. And Washington has a good enough run defense, again, similar to Ohio State and Indiana, to where they'll probably force Luke Altmyer to do a lot and his receivers to do a lot. Now, Washington in no way, shape, or form is the secondary of Illinois, or secondary of Indiana or Ohio State. I'd actually argue that a healthy Illinois secondary is better than a healthy Washington secondary as well, but that wasn't the comparison I was trying to make. Anyway, 5-2, 2-2, and technically if you win out, beat Washington, beat Rutgers, beat Maryland, beat Wisconsin, beat Northwestern. Not really any of those outside of maybe Wisconsin, I would say, are gimmies, but there is a path to winning all of them at 10-2. You can't tell me that Illinois would at least, you can't tell me they wouldn't at least be in the conversation there. This is a team that is strong on the defensive front, weaker at the secondary, in part due to some injuries and inconsistencies and lack of quality depth. And on offense, it's the inverse of that. So Illinois is strong defensively at the lines of scrimmage and on the defensive front. Illinois, outside of their left tackle, is pretty porous on the offensive line. Their running backs are Big Ten West running backs, good but not great. Tight end, I would say, is good. Wide receiver and quarterback are great. So they're stronger on the perimeter offensively, stronger in the trenches and up front defensively. Altmyer is a quarterback who's playing at certainly a top third level in the Power Four, could even be at a top 6 level, which would indicate that he's a top 10 quarterback, because there's around like 60, a little over 60 Power 4 schools. He's somewhere in that range. And Hank Beatty and Justin Bowick are pretty impressive wide receivers. I think that Illinois is a team that, as much as Bielema wants them to play this physical smash mouth football brand, they are much more of a pass attack first, rely on your quarterback and receivers to air it out and win games type of offense. And defensively, very stout, depending on the day against the run. I'd especially say this is the case when they're at home. On the road, I've seen it against Indiana, seen it against Purdue, a little bit early against Duke. It's a little bit of a different story here. So what you should hope for if you're an Illinois fan or inside the locker room or the coaching staff is that with the bye, you can travel better because you've had more time to prepare. You can rest up and make sure that you can give this your A-game effort. And ultimately that you can do against Washington what you have against every team except for Indiana and Ohio State, which is win the turnover battle. You're facing a team that does not have the athletic and size and coaching advantage over you that those two teams do, at least in theory. So maybe you can outcoach them and catch them with their pants down at times. That's what you're hoping for here as an underdog. For Washington, playing host, playing the favorite, they are viewed as better almost across the board in power ratings. Not by a lot, but I don't know of any power rating service that has Illinois as the superior team to Washington. And at the same time, which kind of piles on, Washington is hosting the Illini here. So Washington being favored by 4.5, 5.5 points, I think makes a little bit of sense. And when you look at what Washington has been able to do at home, handily beaten UC Davis, handily beat Rutgers, gave Ohio State a game for close to 3 quarters, pulled away from Colorado State late, against Washington State, which is an away game but not traveling across time zones, which that's going to be most of Washington's away games, is either traveling across states or across time zones, or across multiple states rather. They did pretty well against the Cougars, but against Maryland, they probably should have lost that game. Clutch win, came back, outscored Maryland 24-0 after Maryland scored 20 points in the first 3 quarters, and it was 20-0 Maryland at one point. Against Michigan, look, Michigan, as I mentioned earlier, could have won that game by 30 points if Samaj Morgan could catch the football, or if they had Justice Haynes at running back 1. Michigan was operating kind of down in that game, personnel-wise, and they were clearly the better team, even factoring out home field advantage, the travel, and the early kick. So what you're hoping for here is, now that you're at home, you're going to be stronger. Your opponent is going to be dealing with the same adversities that you did a Saturday ago, and you can play off of that with being this explosive team through the air, having this apex quarterback who's kind of your version of Kyler Murray. And Illinois does not have Michigan or Ohio State's personnel defensively. They're not as talented, they're not as deep, they're not as disciplined, they're not as physical, they're not as big. You know, Michigan has some physical specimens at edge and linebacker, and they have a lot of depth at D tackle. Ohio State has a physical specimen at D tackle. They have some specimens at linebacker, and I would argue personally that Arvell Reese could probably move down to edge and be their number 1 pass rusher. Illinois has some depth. I mean, they got, Dylan Rosiak on the interior. They have James Thompson Jr. They got Kurt Neal. They have Gabe Iacus. I mean, they have some good players, but they don't have what those teams do. So you're top 15 in EPA per drop back with a 0.27. You only allow a 34.8% rushing success rate against an Illinois team that wants to run the ball. And while your offensive line is not good, and I've been very critical of the Washington offensive line, it was a big part of the reason why I didn't think they'd be an amazing team this year, is in order to win in the Big Ten and win at a high level, just in any conference, but especially the Big Ten and SEC, you have to have strong lines of scrimmage play. And Washington just does not. They do not have a lot of depth there. They don't have appropriate size. They're not where they want to be. But Illinois is not exactly that team either. Michigan is. Michigan's run-blocking offensive line, I think, is pretty good. Their defensive line is one of the best in America at shutting down the run. Ohio State's similar, more so with their linebackers than defensive line. A part of that's their scheme. Offensive line-wise, they're kind of mediocre, if not below average at run blocking, but their pass blocking is phenomenal, and they get the ball out quickly, and they have a wonderful quarterback and wonderful wide receivers. Again, with the pass blocking, wonderful tackles. Illinois doesn't really check any of those boxes that Michigan or Ohio State did, outside of maybe the wonderful quarterback, instead of wonderful wide receivers, just good wide receivers. So, as Washington, you're hoping that as the more talented team, the fact that you can probably do everything Illinois wants to at the same level and in parts better, you're hoping that home field advantage and the travel and probably the more balanced offensive attack, the more sustainable one, is able to win out here. And ultimately, I think that's what's going to happen. I believe that while Michigan was able to confirm some things that the Ohio State game made me very skeptical about for the Huskies, Michigan is getting better every week. Ohio State is one of the top teams in America, if not the top team. And I keep saying one of the top, if not the top, because we don't know yet. Washington is one of the best teams Ohio State's played this regular season. We saw what Michigan just did to them, and I don't think Michigan is one of the 10 best teams in America right now. I don't. They have work to go there. So that doesn't help Washington's case to be a definitive favorite against an Illinois team that looked similarly against the Buckeyes the way the Huskies did, and that got plastered by Indiana, but I think Washington would get plastered by Indiana too. That still goes to my point, though, that with the travel edge and the fact that Washington can match Illinois at quarterback, match them at receiver, they have a better running back, their offensive line isn't that much worse, and their defensive front is stout, I think this is very much like the Illinois versus Duke game. Except Washington will not, since they're at home, because outside of really that Michigan game, DeMond Williams Jr. was not unsafe with the football, I think that Washington won't turn it over in the same fashion that Duke did. And that will really help them to win in clutch fashion. They did it against Maryland. They pulled away against Rutgers in the second half. If they can prevent Illinois from coming out and just winning the scripted drives early with that extra preparation time, I like Washington to really start winning the second half here. I think that Washington's the better overall team with the better overall staff, and I believe that they will have a really good day passing the ball and forcing Illinois to pass the football. Looking at Big Ten standings before we get on out of here, both of these teams are 2-2, so they're not in the top half of Big Ten standings right now, but the odds are that whether it's Northwestern or Minnesota or UCLA or maybe Iowa, maybe Michigan, maybe USC, definitely not Oregon. I think Oregon's the best team out of that 3-1 category. These teams can find themselves toward the top at the end of the year. They will be favored in most of their remaining games. Illinois every game from here on out outside of this game, and Washington will be the favorite in every game outside of when they host Oregon to close out the year. I'm so excited for that game. But I'm picking Washington to win, and I am picking them to cover. Wouldn't be shocked if I was wrong. I also wouldn't be shocked if I'm wrong about Texas A&M at LSU, because this game has a line to it that I'm a little bit, just a tinch sketched out by. I'm not going to lie. This is a game that is going to decide a lot in regards to my Penn State coaching search. I've been pretty open on Twitter. I haven't really made much content about it because last week I was sick, but I've been pretty open on Twitter about how I believe Penn State might be able to nab a big-time name. Don't know if they will. Wouldn't predict them to, but I think they'll nab a big-time name. But if LSU opens up, LSU will be the one nabbing the big-time name unless Penn State has taken drastic steps forward as a program that I don't even think your most biased pro-Penn State person or even myself could possibly anticipate. Evan, 4141. Thank you for the $5 super chat. Sam, you're a national treasure. Thanks for your dedication to your craft. Hoosiers win 49-13. I can definitely see... Sorry for my nose. Thankfully that happened during a segment break. But thank you for your prediction. Thank you for the $5 super chat. Wouldn't be shocked if Indiana holds UCLA to fewer than 13 points. One reason Michigan State was able to get them, same reason why Ohio State was really able to get them last year, even why Notre Dame was able to score the amount of points they did last year, was the passing game. If you can play a very good game as a quarterback with good wide receivers, you can find holes in Indiana's zone because they love to run zone. I don't think UCLA is the type of team to do that. So unless they're able to generate some positive runs consistently, I think there's a really good chance the Hoosiers could even shut out the UCLA Bruins. Thank you for that. Let me see what everyone else is saying. Yeah. All right. Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you guys for being active in the chat. Let's get those concurrent viewers up. But anyway, on to Texas A&M at LSU. The third-ranked, undefeated Texas A&M Aggies travel to a defeated, hungry, angry 20th-ranked LSU Tigers in a game that I think is going to decide Brian Kelly's future at LSU. Maybe the Vanderbilt game already decided that, but LSU is technically still in the playoff hunt. And a win here would go very far in building their case to reach the playoffs. But they have to earn a win here. A loss here all but really eliminates them from the playoffs, especially given how that Clemson win has not aged in the way that really anyone expected, but also hasn't aged in the way that LSU would want it to. You wanted that to be a good win on the road and a big backing to your resume, which really is weak without that win being all that impressive. A&M's favored by 2.5 points, and this game will kick off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. Wow. What a game. What a matchup. This is what college football is all about. And I want to talk about the road team first, the Aggies. So A&M, their closest win of the year, and probably their best win of the year, has been at 8th-ranked Notre Dame. 41-40, very back-and-forth game, tons of fireworks. The Nate Borkature catch on 4th and goal from the 8 is going to go down in Aggie land history as legendary. They've also had close wins against Auburn, 16-10, and Arkansas, 45-42. This has been an A&M team that I think really epitomizes good coaching. They win close games. They dominate some teams in other games. They're one of the best teams in America. I don't quite put them in my top 4, which is Alabama, Oregon, Indiana, and Ohio State. But A&M is one of these teams where if some things start clicking for them and if they continue doing what they're doing in parts, improve at other things, they could join that tier at the end of the year. This is going to be their second road game in a row. Back-to-back road games are always a tough spot for these teams. For any team, really. They're always a tough spot. So I wonder how A&M is going to handle that. And I also wonder how A&M is going to handle a game where, much like with Auburn, you're playing an anemic offense, but this offense is better than the Auburn offense for sure. And you're playing a defense that is of similar caliber to the Auburn defense. I know that LSU got cooked defensively in parts by Vanderbilt, but that's what happens when Whit Weeks is out against Diego Pavia and the style of offense that the Commodores run. It sounds like he'll be out for this game too, which will be huge for the Aggies and also another devastating loss for LSU. Hopefully he can get healthy soon. But There are some things scheduling-wise that go in LSU's favor here. As for A&M, they just keep winning, and if they can win this game, their other challenging games will be at Missouri and at Texas. You can't tell me South Carolina will be a challenge at home, especially since Elko's a good coach. He won't overlook them, and South Carolina's been horrific. And Samford's an auto win. You may as well say that A&M right now is 8-0 and just chalk up Samford as a win already. For LSU, that win over Clemson, it was a top 10 win, top 5 win at the time. It's not really a win that's all that special. And then you look at the LA Tech game, Florida, Southeast Louisiana, South Carolina. They haven't really had an impressive win at all. And their most impressive performances, honestly, have been their losses. Like at Ole Miss or at Vanderbilt, losing those games competitively, being in those games. I would say especially the Ole Miss game, given it could have been very lopsided, that's probably their most impressive performance of the year. And when your most impressive performance of the year is a loss, that's not just painful, but that's also at a program like LSU rather unacceptable. We'll get into more of what I think of Brian Kelly's future at the end of this segment. But these are two proud teams, two proud programs. They love to spend. They're constantly battling for recruits. They want to win a national championship. LSU's done it this century. Texas A&M has not. And yet A&M finds itself in a better position. LSU finds itself in position to play spoiler and get back in that conversation. They need a win here because you got to travel to Alabama in 2 weeks, and you get a bye after this game, yes, but Alabama's an animal, and they're going to want to put pedal to the metal in that rivalry game. Arkansas can score points. If Vanderbilt could score points on you, why can't Arkansas with Bobby Petrino and Taylon Green? And what about Oklahoma on the road? That's not going to be fun. Playing that defense with your offense, it's not going to be fun. This is a must-win. A win here simply keeps you treading water. A loss here is like someone snipping a nerve in LSU's spine and their legs don't work anymore. So now they can't tread water. They can only flap with their arms and sink to the bottom and be helpless while doing so. A win here is absolutely necessary. Completely necessary. I believe that A&M's path to victory here relies on Marcel Reed having a similar game he did against Notre Dame and a similar game that he had against Florida, where he was accurate enough and poised enough, was able to get it to Mario Craver and Casey Conception and Nate Borkature to extend drives, play off a good, solid offensive line, and the defense with Cassius Howell, Tareen York, Scooby Williams, the blanket, Will Lee, that they can do enough, just enough, to get some stops, maybe force some turnovers, make LSU play uncomfortably from behind, and force some empty drives, empty calories, which is what LSU's offense is. You're hoping A&M's defense can have a big day. They've had some struggles against better offenses they've played, a la Arkansas, Notre Dame. You're hoping you don't give up 30 points against this anemic LSU offense, which is outside the top 80 in points per play. For LSU, you need this to be ugly. You need it to be a defensive slugfest, and to trust that Nussmeier is healthy enough that he can get it to Brown and Anderson and Tradez Williams and do just enough to, on that final drive, get into field goal range or get into the end zone and you kind of steal one away. That is your path here. Or maybe Reed melts down and you win big, but it's really because of your defense forcing a bunch of turnovers or forcing a bunch of unreal stops and playing out of their mind, which Blake Baker's done that with LSU for really this entire season outside of that Vandy game. Him and that LSU defense have played phenomenally. And again, Whit Weeks being a part of that defense is key. He is their best player there. So I do give Baker and LSU's defense some grace in that Vandy game with him being out. My key problem with LSU here is that I think A&M has more sustainable pathways to win. A&M is better coached. I think they know more of who they are. What is scary about this game is LSU's record at night in Death Valley. But that didn't matter to Alabama last year because Alabama could do plenty of things offensively and LSU was hampered defensively. Well, this year, LSU can do a ton of things defensively, but they are hampered offensively. I think A&M's defense is good enough to kind of hold them down and put a pillow over them. And that is why I think that, Texas A&M, they're going to win and they're going to cover here. I believe that the Aggies are the better team. They're better coached. And I believe that LSU probably has the better defense here, but I think A&M's offense is light years ahead of what LSU has. Nussmeier would be the better passer and thrower of the football if he were healthy, but he's clearly dealing with something and he has no rushing attack to play off of. No run game. Occasionally LSU will get the explosive run here or there, but on a consistent basis, you're only hoping for getting back to the lines of scrimmage or gaining a yard or two when you give the running back a football. It's the opposite of Texas. Texas would be better off just handing it off to their running back or running, a triple option game with Arch Manning instead of ever attempting to throw the football based on how Arch Manning is played. For LSU, they would be better off never running the football at all and just trying to get the ball out quickly so Nussmeier doesn't take plenty of hits and moving the football that way. That's what they would be better off doing. But typically you don't want to do that because having sustainable drives and keeping your opponents honest in the run game and pass game is important. I just have a hard time seeing LSU win this one. I think that A&M will have another close win. And as for LSU, and we can really get into it with the current SEC standings here, look, they're gonna fall, outside the top 10 in the SEC. They're gonna have their third loss that'll put them out of playoff contention. I think Brian Kelly's going to be fired after this year. I'll be one of the first people probably in the college football YouTube space or analyst space to say that. I think he's going to be fired. I kind of thought that at the beginning of the year. Preseason, someone abandoned it after the Clemson game, after it was revealed that Clemson was just utterly trash, kind of put more stock back into it. I'm right where I was in the preseason where I thought LSU ain't all that good. That's all on Brian Kelly because they are talented and they spent money in the transfer portal. I think LSU will get a big name, whether it's a name the fans are going to be uber excited about or it's a name that they're just, okay with, excited about, wait and see. They're probably going to make some programs mad with the hire they make in replacing Brian Kelly. As for Texas A&M here, a win here makes it more and more likely they reach the playoffs, if not potentially reach the SEC championship game in Atlanta to fight for their first SEC title since joining the conference, their first ever SEC title. Moving on to Wisconsin at Oregon. Yeah, this is a super exciting game, guys. This is one that I'm absolutely pumped up for. No, this is not. I can tell you the result of this game. Not just that, the spread will tell you the result. Whenever you see a team favored by 34.5 points, that team ain't losing. Excuse me. But on to talking about the Badgers and the Ducks for, 5 minutes here. Want to do it because I want to talk about Oregon. It's a Big Ten game, but we really, we really do know the outcome of this game. Guys, let's not kid ourselves here. The Wisconsin Badgers travel to what seems like another graveyard for them in the Oregon Ducks in Autzen Stadium. Oregon is ranked 6th in the polls, but they are top 4, top 3. They're one of those teams that has a good shot at winning the national championship, whether it's per FPI, S&P Plus, FEI, or FanDuel's odds to win the national championship. They're up there. 6-1, 3-1. They're favored by 34.5 points. Wisconsin's had back-to-back shutouts, and the program right now is just an absolute mess. I can't even describe how messy this is. I want to probably spend a minute or two here discussing the mess that is Wisconsin and just telling Wisconsin fans, any of them who tune into this, that you deserve better. Barry Alvarez coming on and basically being like the past two, including the current one, presidents of the United States, and being extremely old and out of touch, probably like every president in the 21st century, and lecturing on about things that don't matter, and it's just a smokescreen. Alvarez, along with McIntosh, wanted this thing to work. They've drilled in their skulls that this will work, and probably a big part of the reason why is I think everyone can recognize that Fickell's still a good coach. It just hasn't worked out, and there isn't juice there. Now, maybe they do what Michigan did with Harbaugh in 2020 when it was pretty bad there. They keep him, they make some changes, they inject money in the program, and maybe with an easier schedule next year, Wisconsin can do something with Fickell. I think Fickell's a good enough coach to where there's at least a 1% chance of that happening instead of a 0% chance. But it's time. It's time. And even if they were to make that move and it were to succeed and Fickell comes back and rebounds next year somehow, it would still have been appropriate to fire him this year. Wisconsin's lost 5 straight games. They have no offensive line. They finally have a defensive line for the first time under Fickell. Their linebackers are playing extremely well. Coincidentally, the secondary drops off as those things get fixed. Their receivers are good, but they do not have the QB play to utilize them. They don't have tight ends. They don't have running backs. And their game plan offensively just isn't good because they've changed the identity there. Every year Fickell's been there, so 3 times now. You deserve better. You do, if you're Wisconsin. Do not let McIntosh and Alvarez lecturing you and saying that, sitting back or sitting forward with their cigar and their pocket watch hanging out. Oh, if you've never played, if you've never coached, you don't know. I see so many former players or play callers on Twitter that have no objectivity and have no integrity because they use their noggin, they use their brain to fulfill their biases. They use what they know about the game to rationalize, to not be rational. We can be rational actors here and say that Wisconsin deserves better than this and that it is time to move on. And if we're proven wrong on that and it somehow works, then it's not our fault for calling that, really, because it's this bad. It will just be good on them for sticking through all the pressure and good on Fickell for sticking through that pressure and doing something with it. But Wisconsin deserves better than this. It's an absolute disaster up there in Madison, and they're a proud program. They should expect better. I'm not saying they should expect going 12-0 like they did in 2017 because their schedule was weaker and football was different back then. I think Wisconsin's one of those programs that actually got hurt by the transfer portal. So usually it's the top schools that get hurt, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, like those traditional big 3 no longer have the same monopoly on talent. Some years, like Ohio State this year and last year, they will field teams that look like they aren't affected by the portal, but other years you will see their floors are collectively lower, like Alabama's along with Ohio State this year. Outside of that Florida State game, they don't really look like they're affected all that much from the new era, but believe me, they are. They will be. Wisconsin and some of these other programs that were traditionally good in the 21st century, but were either slow to adapt or do not have the same resources or pipelines or backing that other schools do, also got hurt, despite being traditionally good. So there's just a lot of things that need to be fixed there. I still think Fickell's a good coach, but it's time, And as for Oregon, not much to talk about with them. I don't fault them at all for playing Penn State close. It's the same thing, really, in my mind, a little bit different circumstances, but similar with Ohio State and Texas. Like, I hold it against them a little bit, especially since the current regime and starting quarterback is the same as it is now as it was then when they played Ohio State. But I don't really, because they won the game and they, led from start to finish. It's similar with Oregon and Penn State, honestly. You won the game, led from start to finish. It doesn't look like a good win, and it really isn't a good win with hindsight. Same thing with Ohio State, Texas. But remove that from the body of work from both teams, and Ohio State is the number one team in America right now. They are favored to win the title. Oregon is the 6th-ranked team in America. They're power rated higher than that, and they're top 4 in odds to win the title. This is one of the best teams in college football. So that matched up against a Wisconsin team that is lifeless, that in large part is quit. It seems like their staff to a certain degree is quit. I'm picking Oregon to win, and I'm picking them to name the score and certainly to cover. This is not going to be a close game whatsoever. And if it is, it's because Oregon wants it to be, because they want to get out of there or they want to give their younger guys reps fairly early. That will be the only reason Oregon doesn't name the score and cover here. Wisconsin is one of the few programs in the Big Ten that's winless in conference. I think they're going to finish 0-9. For Oregon, there is an outside shot they can reach Indy. The most realistic pathway for that to happen is Oregon and Indiana win out and Ohio State loses to Michigan. That's the most realistic path. That path is odds-wise not likely. That is a path where even if it happens, Ohio State could still get into Indy over Oregon because they don't play each other. Then it will default to the combined win-loss record of their conference foes. And if Ohio State's higher there, well, they'll move on and they'll play in Indy even if they lose to Michigan. So Oregon doesn't exactly control their own destiny here, but they do in regards to whether they get a home game or road game in the playoffs, or maybe even if they get a bye in the playoffs. If they do win out, there is an outside shot that they go to Indy and play for the Big Ten championship game. All right, moving on to Michigan State. This is our final preview, and then we'll be talking about some Penn State coaching candidates, some other things. We'll get on out of here. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, for the super chats, for the support. Did not appreciate it. Someone in the comment section commenting on my voting. I'm not going to tell anyone who I voted for. Honestly, you know what? I didn't even want to vote in the election, and I only checked like certain boxes, only voted for certain candidates. I didn't even fill everything out. I'm someone who doesn't like to get involved in that stuff on the channel. I just made that comment because a lot of people can agree on one thing. So since a lot of people can agree on that one thing, I'll be public about it. That stuff just isn't good. And stuff hasn't been good really for a lot of the 21st century in regards to competent leadership. So in the same way that I think that, a college football team should call out a coach that isn't doing a good job, I think we can all admit that really regardless of affiliation, the past few presidents have all done a collectively bad job. Honestly, but that's the only political thing I'll say on this stream, and I don't even know if it's political. If everyone can kind of agree with it, then it might just be common sense. But let's talk about Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan is finally back in the top 25, back in the AP poll, back in the coaches poll, but they have to play for the Paul Bunyan Trophy and fight their in-state rival, the Michigan State Spartans, in East Lansing this Saturday. It'll be on NBC, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Michigan's 5-2, 3-1 in conference. Michigan State's 3-4, but unlike UCLA, who's 3-4 but 3-1 in conference, Michigan State's 3-4 and 0-4 in conference. I really thought it was going to work with Jonathan Smith and Michigan State. I really thought it was going to work, and we'll talk about them shortly. I want to talk about Michigan first, but my goodness, has it been bad. For Michigan, there's been feelings of that too at times this year, where whether it was after Oklahoma and how conservatively Michigan coached there, or after USC and how Michigan just got annihilated, there were doubts about Michigan's coaching from a lot of their fans and maybe even from the staff internally. But Michigan, they had a nice win against Nebraska on the road. which I think that was Nebraska's Super Bowl, at least at the time. Now they're probably going to try and refocus that same energy against USC in a few weeks, which is going to be a night game. It was a nice win there, and then they earned probably Moore's best win as a coach against Washington at home, where he came up with a good game plan. He outcoached Jedd Fisch, and his players outplayed Jedd Fisch's players. So, pretty incredible, I would say, for the Wolverines here. They have a different type of test in that they're playing their first rivalry game at Michigan State this Saturday. They also have another rivalry game against Ohio State, not at Ohio State. They host Ohio State, thankfully for their sake, at the end of the year at noon, as always. So a different type of test here, but Michigan is favored by 14.5, and the line crept up after opening up at 12.5. For Michigan State, the Spartans, how do I put it this way? They looked encouraging for the first half against Western Michigan, and ever since then it's been a downward spiral. No defense against Boston College, who is currently 1-6. Youngstown State's a good FCS team, but any competent Power 4 or Power 2 team should destroy an FCS team. Michigan State did not. Michigan State looked encouraging against USC. Lost 31-45, made it a fight for 3 quarters. They, at one point, led Nebraska 21-14, made that a fight, was encouraging. UCLA got destroyed 13-38, and it was the same score against Indiana, but Michigan State played a whole lot better. This is the difference between UCLA and Indiana. UCLA's best is only 25 points better than Michigan State's worst. Indiana's worst is 25 points better than Michigan State's best. So, simple math here says Indiana should beat UCLA by 50, which is kind of what I think happens this Saturday. We'll see if that reigns true. Hosting Michigan in a game where I think Spartans will still, to a certain degree, at least the diehards will show out for, kind of giving one last vote of confidence for the staff and for the team that maybe if they beat Michigan, the ship can be wrought. The ship can be righted. Why did I say wrought? It'll be interesting. This will be a game where Michigan cannot overlook Michigan State, but also Michigan State will need to get up and play hard in this game if they even want to have a shot to win. For Michigan, pay attention to these 6 players. Bryce Underwood at quarterback, Justice Haynes at halfback. You could also say Jordan Marshall too. And then freshman wide receiver Andrew Marsh, who's played out of his mind recently. Wide receiver Donovan McCulley. I'd love to see how Blake Frazier plays, because I don't know if Evan Link is going to be in this game. I don't think he will be. Center Greg Crippen has had a pretty good year. Defensively, look at Jayshon Barham and Derek Moore at edge. Trey Pierce and Rayshawn Benny at defensive tackle. Cole Sullivan at linebacker. Curious to see if Rod Moore plays in this game. He did really well against Wisconsin, but didn't play against Washington or USC. For Michigan State, Aiden Giles, Nick Marsh, center Matt Golbin, wide receiver Amari Kelly. Pay attention to those players. Defensively, I think for Michigan State, what you want to do is do what you did against Indiana. Sell out against the run and see if Michigan can beat you through the air. That's what I think the Spartans want to do. If they actually show a semblance of good coaching, that is what they will do. Sell out to stop the run, see if they can stop it. It's not going to be a given, but if they do, Michigan State will have to then see if their secondary can hold up against this Michigan passing attack. They have a better chance of holding up there than they did against Indiana, but I ultimately don't think that will happen here. I do believe that Michigan is going to win, and not just win, but a cover here. People have said before that Jonathan Smith doesn't understand the rivalry to a certain degree. I don't think that he gets it still. And more importantly, Michigan from a talent angle, just like a raw talent angle on offense, is probably ahead or matched to what a lot of their really good teams under Harbaugh were. They're just not as complete there, and the defense talent-wise isn't there. Also, the coaching isn't there. A lot of Michigan's current issues, I think, have to relate to the porous wide receiver depth, even though a good wide receiver too is emerging. The fact that Michigan does not have excellent tight ends the way they have in the past, though they are deep there and they're good, just not as good. They're not Colston Loveland good. Michigan also, I don't think, is quite as good on the offensive line, but they're getting there. There's a lot of encouraging things from this Michigan offense that remind me of the 21 through 23 offenses, but they're more inconsistent and they don't have the same depth and they're younger there. Defensively, they don't have any of the same type of talent. So for Michigan State, they're going to have to win in a shootout here. And the offense, while it has shown promise and talent, is itself inconsistent. It would be one thing if Jonathan Smith had a 2022 or 2023 USC type team where you have the current bad defense, but your offense is among the nation's best. That's not the case here. The offense is very inconsistent as well. So I'm expecting Michigan and Michigan State to probably battle it out for a quarter or two, but Michigan will eventually pull away and win. I mean, there's a reason, guys, why last year's line was like Michigan minus 4.5 or something at home. And this year, despite it being on the road, Michigan's minus 14.5. Don't overthink this. And as for the Big Ten standings, Michigan is one of these teams that in theory has an outside shot at Indy. In theory. The way you want to maximize this is you win out, including against Ohio State, and Oregon takes a loss somewhere else. Because there is a world where if Oregon wins out along with you too, that Ohio State or the Ducks get an over you to go to Indy. There is an outside shot for Michigan to do that. For Michigan State, your goal at all is to go bowling. And maybe if you're a State fan, you don't even want that so that you can have a change of leadership here. I feel bad for Michigan State fans, same with Wisconsin fans. Those are two fan bases that deserve better than what they are getting right now. Lovely. Now we can talk about Penn State's coaching candidates, or names that I would involve and call if I were Penn State's athletic director, which I am not. Thankfully, I am not. Let me know in the live chat what you all think and who would your top candidates be for the Penn State head coaching job. Let me know down in the comment section below, but let's get right to it. Penn State is one of the best jobs in college football. It is a top 10 job in the sport right now. Pat Kraft has alignment behind him. He has billionaire backing. He and the administration are in lockstep. They just paid Franklin $50 million, $55 million, worst case scenario, because there is an offset there, to just go home, to get away from the program mid-season. I think they are capable of hiring a variety of names from a variety of different backgrounds. What they need to make sure of, to the best of their ability, because you can't always make the perfect hire, and sometimes that can backfire on you to try to make that perfect hire. They need to make sure they have their things in order, that they back who they're going to hire, and that they get it done. They give him all the resources he needs to succeed, and that they don't say over pursue and they don't sell out in a way that could damage the program in the future. They just need to be wise. And I think that Pat Kraft will be wise. I think he's proven that he is wise, especially with that move against Franklin after that Northwestern loss. That was a really ballsy, admirable, smart move. So let's get on to these candidates here. I think the first category, the first tier, are the future head coaches. So I put 3 offensive coordinators and 3 defensive coordinators who I think are young, who have chops, who are innovative in their own ways. So in one way or another, they're elite coaches. For the offensive position, I put Brian Hartline, Mike Shanahan, and Will Stein. Hiring any of these guys as the future head coach would be a gamble, but Stein, Hartline, and Shanahan all have a great track record of success as offensive coordinators, especially Shanahan and Stein. Hartline, I don't know. He's only been an OC for technically 3 years, the play caller for only 2. And in 2023, Day took over the offense, and I'm seeing Day with the play sheet and sometimes with the headset down and clearly calling plays this year. So play caller, I don't know, but you don't want a head coach to be a play caller, with maybe very rare exceptions to the rule. I think Hartline is a generational, if not the best position coach of all time. I'd say he is the GOAT position coach. He's the greatest position coach of all time. I don't think he's a good coordinator, but he can apply some of those aspects from being an elite and the best position coach to being one of the best head coaches in college football down the road. He's disciplined. He clearly is ambitious. I mean, he's interviewed for head coaching jobs. He wants to be the play caller. He wants that to work out. He's a go-getter on the recruiting trail. And he's an elite developer. And he's learned under Day. He's learned under Meyer. And he played for Tressel. So 3 Hall of Fame coaches right there. So I think that would be actually an A-plus hire if you were to make a hire from the assistant tree. I'd say the same thing with Stein. I don't know as much about Shanahan as the other two, and Shanahan's always been with Cignetti. So is it Shanahan's great play calling and offense, or is he calling good plays but within Cignetti's system? Similar with Bryant Haynes, but Haynes was a GA at Ohio State. He's from Ohio. Shanahan is from Pittsburgh. Haynes has coordinated awesome defenses. I think he is the best coordinator for Indiana. Glenn Schumann is an intriguing option, more from the South. Succeeded Dan Lanning as DC, worked with Dan Lanning and Kirby Smart at Georgia. And then Corey Heatherman, he's from the Northeast. I think it's an intriguing name due to how he turned around Minnesota's defense and how he's turning around Miami's defense. Really intelligent guy, been at multiple places, succeeded regardless, learned under Cristobal, learned under Fleck. Definitely someone who can do more with less, and with Penn State's resources, I imagine he could put something good together. So that's the future head coach category. I want to move on to some out-of-the-box hires. These are hires that would be made from a lower level, or coaches who have probably failed or who are going to fail at their current stops that could be intriguing options. These essentially would be options that Penn State fans, I think, would hate. I don't think that Penn State fans would get excited by hiring Bob Chesney, David Braun, or Alex Golesh. I don't. Those are more so the lower level candidates who I think are successful or have something to them, but they're so low level that there wouldn't be that much excitement from the casual fan. For Fickell, Kelly, and Jonathan Smith, and that's Brian Kelly. A name I actually left off this list is Brent Key. I do not think you shouldn't leave him off. I did, and kind of unintentionally, probably because he doesn't fit in really any of these categories. He'd fit in the next category, the category of proven head coaches, but I think maybe the fact that he's an alum and has mostly worked in the South, he's from the South, maybe that's why it didn't come quite forward to my mind. There's a lot of candidates for this job, I think, because it's that good of a job, and because I think with the alignment they have and the backing they have, they could go out and get a really big name, like, Lincoln Riley from OU to USC or Brian Kelly from Notre Dame to LSU type move. Don't think that'll happen. I don't know if it's possible. I happen to think it is, so we're going to entertain that here later in the segment. But some out-of-the-box hires on top of the lower level coaches who I think are good, but the fan base wouldn't be happy about. These are coaches that are currently failing at their stops. So Luke Fickell from Wisconsin, Brian Kelly from LSU, Jonathan Smith from Michigan State. Again, out of the box, I would not want to hire these guys, but I'm not an AD. I'm not qualified to make these decisions. I'm not as wise as I think Pat Kraft is. I think Fickell is a good coach. I think Jonathan Smith is a good coach. I just think they kind of came in to these situations and they didn't expect it to be that hard. I think that was especially the case with Fickell. For Jonathan Smith, I think he underestimated the fact that Michigan State fans basically wanted him to win the second he got there. For whatever reason, and to a certain degree I understand it, a lot of Michigan State fans think that you should be able to, immediately win 7 or 8 games there. And they have to understand, much like Wisconsin does, that this is not the Big Ten of old, it's the Big Ten of new. But what's happened with Smith this year, last year I thought nothing that he did was really unacceptable. This year, it's been a disaster. So I think they need to part ways with him. Same way with Fickell in Wisconsin. I think with Penn State's resources, the fact that they still have a good body of work on the offensive line, Trotween has kept most of his recruits there, most of his commits from what I understand, and Trotween's an elite offensive line coach, and they still have some staffers there that I think could blend well with the philosophies of those coaches. Fickle and Smith could maybe bring some of their better staffers from their current places, mesh with the current PSU staff, maybe make a big name hire somewhere, and with more money, more resources, and better players, they could win, especially with the schedule Penn State has next year. For Brian Kelly, I think it's similar. Kelly obviously is a higher profile coach than Fickle or Smith. Don't view him that much differently given that he is older, and I don't think any fan base would want him at their school after what will probably happen to LSU this year. But fans are not wise, usually. I don't think Kelly would exactly be perfect at Penn State, but it wouldn't be the worst option in the world. Proven head coaches is the next year. This is where Brent Key should be. My apologies for forgetting to put him here. Matt Rule, Eli Drinkwitz, and Clark Lee. And you also got Kenny Dillingham, PJ Fleck, and Matt Campbell. Fleck, I wanted to put Fleck in the out-of-the-box hire, and I probably should have. But let's say Minnesota goes 9-3 this year with that offensive line. If Fleck goes 9-3 with this team, you have Drake Lindsay, who could come with him. You have some receivers with eligibility left who are good enough to contribute to Penn State that you could bring over. You have Coy Parrish, who you could bring over with you. And you have way more resources because Minnesota has no resources. Penn State, meanwhile, based on how they fired Franklin, what they did in the transfer portal, they spent more in the portal than Ohio State did. Penn State has resources that are of the cream of the crop. Minnesota has barren resources. Say Fleck beats Iowa this Saturday on the road with a worse team than what Penn State has, and Penn State couldn't win that game. Say he wins outside of the Oregon game, maybe gives Oregon some fits early. Why wouldn't you hire him? I mean, you wouldn't be excited about it necessarily, but I think there could be some upside there that could be tapped into. Again, Fleck's one of these guys where, he has experience with Jim Tressel. He has experience with Greg Schiano. He has beaten James Franklin and competed with him and outcoached him in multiple games, just hasn't had the same talent. That's an intriguing option. Same with Matt Campbell, for similar reasons. I think same thing with Kenny Dillingham, for similar reasons. If Sam Levitt doesn't think he's maximized his NFL draft stock, and he's been inconsistent this year, he probably hasn't maximized it, you can bring him for a year or maybe even two to Happy Valley with some of the other talent ASU has and retain parts of the core roster, and that would be an exciting hire, especially given what Dillingham has done in just 2.5 years. For Rule, Drinkwitz, and Lee, Rule, at this point out of this entire list, it would be Rule or Campbell that probably has the least flash to them. Rule, though, is proven. I think with better resources, he would perform better, but you'd like to see him finish out the year strong. Drinkwitz could bring Bo Perbula and much of Missouri's roster since he's portal friendly, is NIL friendly. No doubt I think Penn State has better resources than Missouri. And for Clark Lee could bring some talent over, but more importantly, if you can win at Vanderbilt, you could probably just bring yourself and your staff over and win with Penn State's talent after changing the culture. This final list is controversial. I do not think Penn State will hire anyone from this list, but given they are a blue blood, and given they told they that meme from the pawn shop or whatever, a TV show about like pawn shop stuff. I'm gonna pay you X amount of money to bleep off. That's what they did to Franklin. When you do that, you can make moves. You can make a splash hire. That's what you can do. And I think Penn State's capable of that. A&M, think about it. They paid Jimbo $75 million to screw off. They got Elko. Now, Elko was from Duke, I know, but Elko was a big-time name that other big-time programs would have wanted. And they made sure to get him. after the whole Stoops thing. I think Kraft is probably in more of an alignment and a better AD and has better things in mind than what the A&M oil guys want. I think they could make a really good move. So I'm prefacing this list because I know there will be people who are like, why do you have top 5 coaches on here? Like, Penn State isn't getting Dan Lanning or Marcus Freeman or Ryan Day. No, I don't think they will. I never said they will. But they should call them. They should make them say no. You should go to DeBoer, Elko, Freeman, Sark, Lanning, Day. If Lincoln Riley has success, you should go to him. You should go to them and say $16 million per year for 5 years, or $16 million for 6 or 7. Typically you don't want to do the 10-year deal, typically. But if you're Penn State and you think you have money to burn and you want to get someone who's proven, yeah, just go up and say, hey, $60 million per year. And if they'll say no, and they probably will, okay, just move on to the next one. Don't really need to explain why anyone on this list would be a good hire, but just thought I would shoot it out there. I think Penn State is capable of making a seismic move with someone on that list. I don't know who that is. I would have no idea if I told you you should unsubscribe from the channel. But I think they have the money and the backing and the alignment and the guts to maybe entice one of those coaches to think about it, if not press the button. I do not believe that someone from that top tier will be hired. I ultimately think that one of the guys from the proven head coach list will be hired, along with, Adam Brent Key and probably someone from that group will be hired as Penn State's next head coach. Either that or one of the proven coordinators who will be a head coach. The out-of-the-box hires and the make them say no are named for that reason. I don't think Penn State will go there, but maybe they will. We'll see. All right, now it's time to get to the added takeaways from all these different games, but really from the Oregon and Indiana game. Let me see. I did not include, by the way, Cignetti in that list because Cignetti just signed a big contract. So Cignetti's already come out and publicly signed an extension. Then he's paid the 3rd highest coach in football. If Penn State ran at him with an offer of like $16 million per year, based on him signing that mid-season, I genuinely believe that Indiana would just match at $16 million. Genuinely believe that. I don't think Cignetti's leaving. If he didn't sign that extension mid-year, I would have put him on this list. Same thing with any of the other make them say no candidates. If they signed extensions mid-season right now, then I wouldn't have them on the list. But that's not the case. Nose is a bit plugged up, but we will fight on. So I didn't get to this last week. Wanted to get to it, but couldn't. We are going to be talking about some of my added takeaways from Oregon's loss to Indiana. We'll do the same with Indiana and their win over Oregon, and then spend like 5 minutes talking about why I think that this was a historic game for a variety of reasons. Many of them relating to Indiana, but I think others relating to Oregon too. I'm just telling you guys, Oregon is tied for first with Ohio State in points per play margin, and they had to play a team that was way harder than Texas, who was Ohio State's toughest opponent per FPI. The point I'm making there is not to discredit Ohio State, nor is it to say that Oregon is like the best team in America confirmed because they're better than IU in points per play margin despite losing to them. It's to say that Oregon could be the best team in America. They probably have the most room to grow, which certainly puts them in that top category. And they did that while Indiana beat them. That is historic for a variety of reasons. But let's talk about Oregon first and discuss some of my added takeaways. I don't think that Oregon's 20-30 loss to Indiana should sound alarm bells. A lot of Oregon fans, plenty of them, seemed to have panicked after that game and are still panicking. Oregon fans, I see you all on Twitter. You're still talking about Indiana in the same way that I think Indiana is still talking about you and talking about how awesome they are. That was a historic game. Typically, there are plenty of ramifications, positive for the winner, negative for the loser after that type of game, and there's heightened emotions and all of that. But I don't think that loss should oh, I choked that there. I don't think Oregon's 20-30 loss to Indiana should sound the alarm bells, especially after the way they responded to the Rutgers game. So let me tell you why that is. Oregon is strong in a variety of ways. I think they are in a group of 4 teams that are national title favorites. Indiana is another. Obviously, they've played well. They have shown that they are consistent. They beat Oregon. Ohio State's in that category. Reigning national champs, number 1 consensus in power ratings, and they are undefeated. Also the favorites per FanDuel by a pretty good chunk to win it all. And then there's Alabama, the current SEC favorite. They have played the toughest schedule out of all 4 of these teams, and they've looked pretty dominant in all of those games outside of the loss to Florida State, which kind of looks more like a fluke than anything else. For Oregon, I'm not worried because their lines of scrimmage are big, beefy, physical, athletic, and they play angry. They strap you to a chair and they force you to eat the pizza. And they make you swallow all of that grease, and they make you feel like absolute crap. That is what Oregon's trench play does. Their offensive line, I think, is close to perfect in run blocking. Their defensive line, great at stopping the run, great at getting to the quarterback. Offensive line, I would say, is great at pass protection. It's an area we'll talk about in a few minutes here that they could improve on, but they're still overall good there. I really think that lines of scrimmage play is important, especially for teams that don't have centennial receiver or perimeter talent. So Ohio State has amazing lines of scrimmage play, but they, if they get beat there, can go to other avenues to win or even dominate. Oregon, I think in the future could do that with how they've been recruiting at wide receiver, and their secondary is pretty phenomenal. It's actually better than Ohio State's in EPA per dropback allowed, but they don't have Jeremiah Smith. They don't have Carnell Tate, and their receiver room isn't as deep yet. And I don't know if it ever will be because Hartline's that good. The point being that if you are not Ohio State, or if you are not some of those Alabama teams with insane receiver skill like 2018 through 20, you especially need that awesome trench play to dominate opponents and to even have a shot at being the best team in America. Oregon has that. They have the physicality, they have the size, they have the run, they have it all. Run blocking, pass blocking, run defense, pass rush. They have it all in the trenches. They're first in points per play margin in large part because in every game they have had wins at the lines of scrimmage. Indiana overall beat them, but on my rewatch, which is what inspired this video, there were points where Oregon was able to win at the lines of scrimmage against an Indiana team that is very stout there. Very stout. Speaking of the lines of scrimmage, the rushing offense for Oregon. So they have ran for 1,693 yards this year, 6.6 yards per carry, and 19 touchdowns. They are on path, especially with the schedule they have, to break 3,000 rushing yards, run over 6 yards per carry, and have like 30 to 40 rushing touchdowns. Maybe even more than that, but probably in the 30 to 40 range. Whether it's De'Aaron Hill, whether it's Noah Whittington, Jaden Lamar, no matter who Oregon trots out there, that offense performs well, especially on the ground. And they're young there, but they're young at really every position outside of parts of the offensive line. Oregon is just, they're a beast. And they will physically pound you if they get the chance. And I think that's a big strength. That's why I think they will win out and they will be undefeated for the rest of the year and get a home playoff game, or maybe get the bye if they somehow sneak into Indy and win it. Their secondaries improved too. So Oregon brings in Dylan Thieneman. Brandon Finney is a true freshman who's starting for them. Ife Obadegwu rotates in as a redshirt freshman. Jaden Kennedy is a transfer from Ole Miss. They added new pieces and got better everywhere. They are more physical. They are taller. They are longer. They are stickier. They are harder hitting, more physical. That secondary impacts every opponent. It's why Mendoza played nearly a perfect game and still threw a pick six. Because the secondary is that good. And it took Indiana's receivers to expose any type of hole there. And Indiana has one of the best receiver corps in America. Not Ohio State caliber, but it's one of the nation's best. It's certainly up there, especially if you only look at the duo, the top two receivers. Oregon is, as I mentioned earlier, young across the board. So let's run through their depth chart here. Oregon only brought back about 40% of their production from 2024. Their receivers starting: Malik Benson, senior; DeCorian Moore, freshman; Gary Bryant Jr., redshirt senior; Isaiah World, senior; Emmanuel Pregnan, senior; Iapani Lololu, junior; Dave Uli, junior; Alex Harkey, senior; Kenyon Sadiq, junior; Dante Moore, redshirt sophomore; Noah Whittington, redshirt senior. Go into some areas where you're going to rotate, like Perry Cooper, freshman; Jeremiah McClellan, redshirt freshman; Justice Lowe, redshirt junior; Jamari Johnson, backup tight end, redshirt sophomore; Austin Novosad, redshirt sophomore; Brock Thomas, redshirt sophomore; Luke Moga, redshirt freshman; Jaden Lamar Jr., Jordan Davison, freshman; Deer Hill Jr., freshman. On defense, D-line, Mateo Uyunglele, Jr., Bear Alexander, Jr., Amari Washington, Jr., Tatum Tuioti, Jr. You rotate a lot on the D-line. So who's behind them? Ashton Porter, redshirt sophomore; Terrence Green, redshirt sophomore; Tione Gray, redshirt freshman; Blake Purchase, redshirt sophomore; Aiden Breland, redshirt freshman; Jericho Johnson, redshirt freshman. You look at linebacker: Bryce Betcher, redshirt senior; Devin Jackson, redshirt junior; Jerry Mixon, true junior; Gavin Nix, freshman. The secondary, you have Brandon Finney Jr., freshman; Jaden Kennedy, redshirt senior; Dylan Thieneman, junior; Peyton Woodyard, behind Thieneman, sophomore; Aaron Flowers, redshirt freshman; Kingston Lopa, behind Flowers at strong safety, redshirt freshman; Theron Johnson, redshirt senior; behind him, Sione Loole, redshirt junior; and Ife Obadegwu is another corner, redshirt freshman. It's a young team, especially in the two deep. And I think they're going to grow. And especially looking at Finney and DeCorian Moore, who are true freshman starters and among the better players on the team, I believe that Oregon as a team should get better as the year goes on. And a final strength of theirs is their roster talent. They are the fifth most talented roster in America per 24/7 Sports team talent composite. Specifically zooming in on that Indiana game, though, since Oregon was the loser, there are some added takeaways that I think Oregon can improve on. Since they're the loser, that's going to be my area of focus for Oregon when looking back on that game against Indiana. It'll be different for the Hoosiers when I do that segment. So Oregon, the areas they can improve on, I think will be helped along with added experience and maybe facing some more adversity. Though maybe that game against Indiana was enough adversity. I think the Ducks' greatest friend is experience, followed by the adversity they face. The number one thing they can improve upon is Dante Moore's awareness. So you didn't see this against Penn State, but there was a lot that went right for Oregon in pass protection against Penn State. Penn State doesn't do a good job of getting to the quarterback. Their defensive line and linebacker core has been rather underwhelming this year. And I think that Oregon got away with some holds against Penn State that they did not against Indiana. Like Indiana, Oregon on both sides, I think was much better officiated than Penn State, Oregon. And Indiana, Oregon was not officiated well. I mean, Indiana got away with some things. Oregon got away with like a blatant PI that was super bad. I think everyone can admit that. Now, I'm not saying officials decided the game for Indiana or for Oregon in the Penn State game. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the Indiana game was very bad for Moore, and since that clearly was their toughest game played yet, that does make me and others question his awareness. So moving forward, he has to do a better job of getting the ball out. He can't try to play hero ball. When a defender's closing in on you and nothing's open, just throw it away. Don't set your team further behind the chains by taking a sack or running out of bounds. Don't do it. Do not do that. So that's number one. Number two is their tackle play. Harkey and World have allowed 16 pressures combined. Harkey, I think, has allowed like 11. Oregon's tackles, I think, are a lot more like guards in their size, like their style of play. They're just big guys that are meant to move you, but do not have the best feet or anchor, which I think is why Oregon's run blocking O-line is so ridiculously good. You have a bunch of movers and bulldozers and shakers out there who can just shove guys over, open up lanes, and then your running backs are tough and physical. You have the perfect rushing attack if you utilize it properly, and if you know how to like line up your offensive linemen on your opponent's defensive linemen and linebackers and they execute their blocks well. But for pass blocking, the guards are good. Poncho Iapani Lololu is fantastic. The tackles are gettable with rushers that have speed, good technique, and with defensive coordinators that know how to send simulated pressure and try to confuse the offensive line. That's where the tackles are gettable. There's still a great tackle duo, though. It's just an area where they can improve. Again, Oregon is a team that is so good that I can nitpick them. And that's really all I can do, honestly. I think maybe sticking to the run could help the Ducks. They did this against Rutgers, where they had around 40 or a little under 40 carries in that game, averaged 11.2 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns for 415 rushing yards. It was crazy what they did. They blocked well in almost every play. They went away from the run a little bit against Indiana, and part of me gets it because IU either gave up usually 5 yards or more on the ground, or they completely stopped them or got the TFL. They were aggressive in run defense. And Moore had some success through the air. So part of me does get that. But at the same time, they had some moments against Indiana where they were winning the lines of scrimmage, their run blocking O-line versus Indiana's run defense. And I think IU has one of the best, if not potentially the best run defense in America. I think a lot of that Old Dominion game where they struggled there was a fluke. I think the real Indiana defensive strength is being the best against the run. So if Oregon maybe sticks to that a little bit more, I think they could have some more success, but that's speculative. And last but not least, I don't know how true this is, because Indiana is this elite team relative to this year. I thought that Indiana clearly was the more physical team on the second rewatch. There was some back and forth there, but at the end of the day, Oregon looked like a good team in that game, but Indiana just looked better and they looked tougher. Really. Like, Oregon's D-line and O-line are ridiculous, but Indiana was able to outpace them and work them there. Indiana also out-schemed Oregon. So if coaching adjustments are made, I would assume this game would probably be closer than it was in Autzen, but maybe it wouldn't be. I don't know. I think that in key moments, whether it was some of those rushing plays or the play where Dylan Thieneman got ran over by Roman Hemby, I think there were some areas where Indiana was the more physical team. I chalk that up, though, to Indiana probably playing one of their better games of the year, to Indiana being one of the best teams in America, and if you take out priors, they're the best team in a lot of advanced metrics. Priors are important, not saying to do so, but that just shows how good of a team IU is this year. And then last but not least, I don't know. I think maybe after that Penn State game, maybe Oregon felt a little bit invincible and got caught off guard there. I don't know, just some speculation, but some areas to suggest that Oregon could improve on. Those are my added takeaways from Oregon and their performance against Indiana. Ultimately, I would not be shocked if this team won at all. I actually have them playing in the national championship game in my most recent college football playoff predictions video. This is one of the best teams in America, one of the best staffs, and one of the best rosters. So there's no reason to sound the alarm bells as long as Oregon continues to win and look good and they don't drop any more games in the regular season. With Indiana, my added takeaway is that, especially in regards to the game against Michigan State, which helps put some things in perspective and allows me to remove myself a little bit from the Saturday where Indiana won, view it from more of an objective, 50,000 feet in the air view. Indiana is one of the best teams in college football. There is an argument, I think, for them to be the best. And rewatching their matchup against Oregon encourages that idea in my mind. Look at what Oregon just did to Rutgers. They had to travel across America. And I know Rutgers does not have a good defense, but Rutgers is a really good offense, or at least did before this Saturday. They had to travel across America, coming off of an emotional game, classic letdown spot, classic trap. They lead 56-3 at the end of the third quarter. Kaliakmanis didn't even complete, I think, 33% of his passes. He had an all-time low QBR and passer rating in his time at Rutgers, and an all-time low ever since the 2022 season when he played as a true freshman for Minnesota in passer rating. I mean, my goodness. Oregon just poured it on Rutgers, just like they poured it on everyone else, how they should have poured it on Penn State, but Penn State had a comeback attempt in the fourth quarter. Everyone but Indiana. Indiana won convincingly, to say the least. So I want to talk about some of my takeaways where they won and they beat Michigan State and they made it look easy even with the slow start on defense, and Oregon also beat Rutgers. So I'm now looking at this from more of a 50,000 foot thing rather than I just got done watching it on my TV and oh my gosh, I'm filled with emotions because it was a great back and forth game. The number one thing that's going for Indiana here is they have the nation's best staff. And I don't think it's particularly close after these first 7 games. I don't. Don't get me wrong, Ohio State and Oregon are very close, and I would say Georgia is too, and there are probably some other staffs who could fight for that. But for Indiana to do what they do with the 74th most talented roster per recruiting rankings, the 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite, they are the best coach team in America. They don't beat themselves, if ever. The 2 times they've beaten themselves this year, I would argue, or really the 4 times. The 2 long QB runs against Old Dominion, the pick 6 against Oregon, the pick thrown against Iowa, and the busted coverage against Illinois and the busted coverage against Oregon. That's like 6 total plays in 7 games. Most teams have more plays than that where they have, beaten themselves. Even if it's in things that aren't as noticeable as where Indiana allowed busted coverages, those are touchdowns. For Michigan against Wisconsin, their tackle gets blown up by a defensive end and they give up a 5-yard TFL. For Ohio State, Tegra Shabola's blocking Carson Hinsman on a run play for whatever reason. The best teams even have a few moments where they beat themselves. That happens with Indiana. But they coach up these players to such a degree that I can't compare them really to any other staff. I don't know if any other staff would do this type of job. So I kind of default to having Indiana as the best staff in college football. Not necessarily the best team, but They have an argument for that I'll lay out here too. And that really starts from their lines of scrimmage. So Indiana has a 10.3% havoc rate margin. They only allow their opponents to force like 7% of Indiana's plays to be a TFL, a sack, a turnover, a stuffed run, a pass defended, etc. Indiana forces their opponents to take those plays like 17% of the time. They do a phenomenal job of getting pressure, forcing turnovers, forcing punts. Their stop rate is top 10. They're so dominant on the lines of scrimmage. They take the pedal to the metal. They don't let off the gas, rarely, unless it's the fourth quarter and they're already up by 4 scores. And Cignetti always looks pissed off. Always. Like, he's never satisfied. I think that's another hallmark of a great coach. Never satisfied. You saw it with Saban, and I think Cignetti learned that from Saban. You see that to a lesser degree from other, like, elite coaches. So, Kirby Smart, you see that some from him. You see it from Ryan Day. You see it from Lanning. Yeah, you see it from the best of the business. And Cignetti, I think, does that more than... I mean, he is always mad until the clock hits 0, and even then, he can be pretty mad. Indiana's linebackers and NFL receivers are also other key strengths. So, Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. have over 1,100 receiving yards, and they have 16 receiving touchdowns for 7 games. Indiana, if they win out, is going to Indy. With 13 games, I imagine Indiana has a really good shot at getting 2 1,000-yard receivers, 2 receivers with 10-plus receiving touchdowns. Mendoza is a Heisman frontrunner. I should have put him up here as a strength. But Indiana has so many strengths, and Mendoza is the first that comes to mind. So I wanted to go with some other out-of-the-box areas. And re-watching that Oregon game reminded me of how elite Indiana's receivers are. I actually gained more respect for the receivers on the rewatch because Oregon didn't really do anything poorly in the secondary. They covered well. They stayed with their man. They were disciplined. I mean, that's why they had the pick 6. That's why Mendoza had to throw the ball away at times. Indiana just made better plays. They made the one-handed catches. They made contested catches in the end zone. Mendoza threw the ball at an NFL level to the boundary, down the field, to the check down, you name it. He threw a great ball, and he played a really good game. And his receivers were a big part of that. For the linebackers, Elijah Hardy, Aiden Fisher, and Isaiah Jones have 11 sacks through 7 games. Whether they love to send them on blitzes or, you know, they come in and swoop in as the quarterback's trying to roll out. These Indiana linebackers, they are the heart and soul of the defense, along with the defensive front. And you can't forget about D'Angelo Pons and Lewis Moore and Amari Farrell. You can't forget about them either. But these linebackers are the epitome of Indiana football. They are tough, they are disciplined, and they are fundamentally sound. That's the other strength for Indiana. They are the most fundamentally sound team in football. They do not beat themselves. They don't. The one time they did against Oregon, outside of the pick 6, which was a great play by Finney, were when Oregon stemmed on the D-line and Indiana just kept false starting. And at the end of the day, that actually didn't even really matter. If they didn't, think about it this way. If those two teams rematch, even if Oregon makes better coaching adjustments, but Indiana doesn't react to the stemming that way, Indiana could win by like 17 points based on how that game went. It didn't prevent Indiana from winning. I mean, they are that fundamentally sound. And watching them progress from last year to this year has been an impressive case study. Let me tell you. I mean, that's been phenomenal watching what Indiana does. It's crazy. So their strengths, I think, are that Indiana is college football's best team solely when looking at 2025. When you factor in priors, Ohio State's better. Oregon's maybe better when factoring in priors. but at the same time, they're pretty close to Ohio State. So it's hard to say that Indiana is definitely worse than Ohio State looking at priors and definitely better than Oregon. There has to be nuance there. Could be worse than Alabama when looking at priors. If you only care about priors and BCR, then Indiana's not a top 5 team, which at that point I'd throw your whole opinion out because clearly they defy the rule to a certain degree. If you only look at 2025 and don't care about priors, which I also think is foolish, but not as foolish as only caring about priors for sure, then Indiana right now is your number 1 team, and it's Ohio State or Oregon who's number 2 or 3. FEI has it like, without priors, it's Indiana 1, Oregon 2, Ohio State 3. I think without priors, without priors, Ohio State would be first in FPI, Indiana would be second, and Oregon would be third. I think that's what ESPN's efficiency metrics are. I think are teams' numbers factoring out priors, I think is what efficiency is, and Ohio State's number 1 there. So Indiana's a strong team that I absolutely love, and I like them along with Ohio State, Oregon, and Alabama to be in that tier 1 of teams that I think are going to win it all when it's all said and done. Let's give some critiques, though, and a lot of this is really nitpicking, so we'll go over it pretty quickly. Indiana, it would benefit them, and especially Mendoza, if the right side of the offensive line could improve in pass protection. I also think that Indiana's rushing attack, I know it was against Iowa and Oregon, who they are among one of the better run defensive fronts in America, especially Iowa, but it was inconsistent at times in both of those games. It was good, but not great. And even in the MSU game, it struggled pretty early. The rushing attack did. And then as the game went on, as Indiana really uncorked that secondary and passing attack, they were able to run the ball in the end. So having a more consistent ground attack and better protection, a lot of that relies on the offensive line, but also scheme when Indiana likes to run. That could help. Indiana's typically good for giving up 1 busted coverage per game. The Oregon game showed that. Michigan State was able to find their way in between the zone for really the first 2 drives, and you saw that against Illinois. Tightening that up a little bit. Again, some of that might just be due to the scheme. You're always going to give up one of those. I don't know. Michigan in 2023 was kind of like that, where outside of really the Alabama game, they gave up a deep shot every game, but outside of that, they were pretty much perfect. I wonder how much of this is like even realistic, because Indiana's already so good, and I'm not just nitpicking here. I think one area where I'm genuinely not nitpicking, or maybe 2 areas. So for Oregon, that's Dante Moore's awareness, and also the lack of weapons outside of wide receiver 1 and tight end 1. For Ohio State, it's not nitpicking to say their run blocking O-line and running back room, and maybe a little bit of tight end blocking. You want to desire more out of that. And special teams could go for Oregon and Ohio State too. For Indiana, the areas which are not nitpicks, but probably some genuine concerns, are wide receiver 3. So E.J. Williams has been good, but having him be great, that would be very helpful. Because, you have two really good receivers, but imagine if you had a third, what that could do with the passing attack you have. And 5th and final is the talent. This is more so for the future. You can't change this now, but that could be a concern down the road. Indiana's already defied it against Oregon. They could defy it again as the year goes on, but it reared its ugly head last year, and it's reared its ugly head for other teams before. So we'll see about Indiana and that talent component. I think they are the best team since 2023 Washington at alleviating that. And there are some similarities there. NFL receivers, first-round NFL QB. Indiana's not quite as talented as a receiver, or maybe not as talented as O-line as that Washington team was, but to compensate for that, they have a much better defense, for example. They are the best team since that 2023 Washington team at, I think, kind of defying that blue chip norm. But even Washington ran into 2023 Michigan and just couldn't do anything. So we'll see what happens. I think Indiana, especially just given what they've shown me already, is probably going to do a better job at scaling talent than even that Washington team did. But we'll see. Love Indiana's future. Think at this point they're close to a lock, if not already a lock, to go to Indianapolis, reach the college football playoff, and we'll see. They'll probably win some playoff games. And then last but not least, a just brief segment talking about why this game made history. This will be the last you hear of this game. Tomorrow there will be, I'm going to read you what videos will be tomorrow. Not all of them. Don't want to overpromise here. Want to promise less, deliver more. There will be a Big Ten preview and an SEC preview for the week. So all the SEC and all the Big Ten games, I'll go over like each of them for a minute or two in those segments. That way you get the whole digest of the conferences. We will talk about either tomorrow or Friday who can win it all and who the Big Ten's best team is. Missouri versus Vandy and Bama versus South Carolina is here. We didn't talk about Ohio State tonight, but as much as I'm someone who, I didn't even have Ohio State number 1 in my top 10. I think Ohio State's being unfairly criticized by some of the ESPN talking heads. I also think that Ohio State fans are getting a little bit too much Kool-Aid from this team. So I want to address Ohio State and talk about the proper way to disagree with them being in a tier of their own, and also give criticism to the people who are like, oh, well, it's boring that Ohio State's won. It's really not. Like, it's not boring. I can understand from like a chaos standpoint it can be, but if a team is really that dominant and you really love football, it's not going to be boring. It might be frustrating if you root for a team that has to play them, but it will not be boring. Like LSU in 19 wasn't boring. Michigan in 23 was not boring. Ohio State last year was not boring. Same thing with the 2 Georgia teams. Same thing with 2020 Bama. They're not boring. So, we're going to talk about that tomorrow, along with some 10 Reasons stuff. Tomorrow through Friday, those things will be released. Last but not least, I want to give you a few minutes talking about why this Indiana-Oregon game made history. Indiana versus Oregon is a... Hold on. Bless me. Indiana versus Oregon is a game that I strongly believe will be looked back upon a decade or 2 or even 3 decades from now as a turning point in college football, as a historic point, an inflection point, a fork in the road in college football. And I want to discuss with you why that is. Indiana was a 7.5-point underdog who had never beaten a road top 5 team before in its history. Curt Cignetti entered that game with only 2 losses to top 5 Ohio State and top 5 Notre Dame as they finished the year, the 2 national championship game participants, 2 of the great head coaches in football right now, and with the 74th most talented roster per 24/7 Sports Team Talent Composite, being 7.5-point underdogs and having to travel a long ways to Autzen, many wondered if they can win. I picked Indiana to cover. I said that they would compete, and I said that they definitely could win, but even I didn't pick them to win. And I'm one of the biggest backers of Indiana nationally. After this game, I am utterly convinced that there is more parity in CFB now than there was before. And it wasn't just that game that convinced me of that. Vanderbilt's rise has convinced me of that. Texas Tech's rise has convinced me of that. Texas, Penn State, and Clemson cratering has convinced me of that. The fact that people think this Ohio State team, as it stands right now, it could be at the end of the year, but as it stands right now, is a GOAT caliber team. No. Alabama losing to Florida State and people thinking that is the unanimous number 1. We have parity. No one is invincible. No one is even 2024 Ohio State at this current moment. No one. And that team was the first national champion to lose 2 games since 2007. So we have more parity than we ever have before. And this game increased the perceptions of that parity. What that means is Texas Tech will look at that game with all the money they've invested, and they will think, say I'm a Texas Tech billionaire and I'm looking at the AD. Say that. Think that in your mind. And you are the AD. Well, why can't we do that? Why can't we go on the road and, beat and handily beat one of the best teams, one of the elite teams? And, you say, looking at me, well, we need more money. We need more resources. We don't have that staff yet. Well, here's a gold bar, a wad of cash. Go out and do that. The belief in so many programs that if Indiana can do this, we can do it, is only going to spurn further investment and further fanaticism. Now, that could also backfire in a way where I think you're seeing this with certain programs where they want their coach out because they're impatient. And for some programs, you're just not going to get what Cignetti does. But I think other places that are wiser will be encouraged by this result, and they will fundraise, they will get new investment, and they will also realize that not just because Cignetti was able to do this, and NIL has enabled some smaller schools to match money and match opportunity cost of recruits that are looking at other schools. I also think that the clock rules, the limiting of possessions, helps with that too. I do. So there is more parity in CFB, and this game is a part of that. Cignetti, if you do not think he's an elite head coach, you need to be checked into a psych ward. That win, I think, confirmed that there is a new elite head coach on the block. Now, maybe I'm early, but I said he was a top 5 coach last year, caught some heat for it. So far, everything that I've seen has confirmed that suspicion of mine. So far. The Big Ten is also stronger. That's another thing. So Indiana is committed to succeeding in college football. We know Ohio State is. They have an elite head coach in Day. They have an elite program. And, their athletic department, I constantly get fans complaining to me that their athletic department's subpar. But as far as I'm concerned, Day probably runs the athletic department. So as long as he's there, I always view Ohio State as one of the best programs in America. And right now they are the number 1 program in America. Oregon, I think, is probably a top 4 or 3 program in America right now. I had them, I think, as the 4th best looking over the past 4 years. And if you're looking at really the here and now, which is really just this year and maybe a bit of last year, Oregon, I would definitely say, is top 4. If not, they could even be the 2nd best program in football right now, given what we're seeing out of them. They're committed. Penn State's committed. That's why they fired Franklin. That's why they tried to back Franklin, and when it didn't work, they kicked him out. Michigan's committed. USC's committed. Look at their NIL and what they're investing. I think Washington is committed. I believe Nebraska is committed. Wisconsin is trying to be committed. Same thing with Minnesota. Same thing with Illinois. You do not have the same commitment across the board in the Big Ten you do the SEC, and that needs to change if the Big Ten wants to call itself the best conference in America. But they're showing signs at different angles to where they are catching up to the SEC. I do not think they've surpassed them yet. I think a lot of Big Ten fans are saying they have as kind of a cathartic release to try and anger SEC people they don't like. It's like you're being intellectually dishonest to make your opponent angry. It's political. It's political strategy. I don't think that's reality, though. I think the SEC still is the overall better conference. The Big Ten's just better at the top, though. And the good news is for the Big Ten and for people who think the Big Ten's better than the SEC, because the top at the Big Ten is expanding with a team like Indiana joining that will strengthen your argument if that continues, that down the road maybe the Big Ten can match the SEC in terms of commitment and overall conference depth. Big Ten is stronger now than it ever has been, and that is with an era that does put a much lower cap on the best teams. Like Alabama will not, They will never field the 2020 caliber Bama team ever again. I do not think Ohio State will ever field a team like the 2019 team again. Michigan will not field the 2023 team again. Georgia, do not think they will field the 2021 or 2022 team again, at least under the current rules. And there are exceptions to the rule. Like Ohio State should bring a lot of guys back for 2026. Alabama, if they continue to win out at the clip they are, they could be in a conversation for one of the better teams of the 2020s. If Indiana or Oregon, just from a pure dominance standpoint, are as dominant in the rest of their games as they have been for the first 7, they could be in that conversation. Just saying it's a lot less likely now than it was for teams to be at that top, like GOAT caliber conversation. For Indiana, their program ceiling, I think, is raised by this. So they've had the resources to be elite. They committed to it last year. They spent more in the portal this year. They've recruited some blue chippers for this upcoming recruiting class. They're now constantly in the top 5, top 6 for finalists for 4- and 5-star level commits. And with that win over Oregon, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to go to Indiana if you are a high-level commit. They clearly develop you. They coach you well. I mean, again, they are up there right now with Oregon and Ohio State in the Big Ten, and those are recruiting monsters. So why can't Indiana become one? And for Oregon, this is what also makes history. Typically, when you lose these type of games, when you lose to these type of teams, like the brand that Indiana is, that typically is not a good sign for you. You'll typically fall off a cliff. I don't think that's going to happen with Oregon. A lot of that has to do with who Indiana is, but it also has to do with who Oregon is. Oregon lost these games in the past, and it meant that they weren't going to play for a title in the BCS era, or it meant that they did have some weaknesses that would be exposed in the playoffs, in the Mark Helfrich era, playoff era, Mario Cristobal era. I don't think Oregon's like that. Now, I don't believe this Oregon team is closer to 2021 or 2022 Georgia than they are to Chip Kelly, Oregon. They're still closer to Chip Kelly, Oregon. If they were to somehow replicate that Georgia run at Oregon with the new rules, that might be an all-time coaching job for that specific season. But what they've been able to do with how last year's class and this year's class, if it holds, get the highest quality player on average per recruit, that's pretty incredible. And I do not view Oregon really all that much worse than I did before they lost to Indiana, if I'm being honest with you guys. I think that Oregon will rebound. They'll continue to be one of the best programs in the Big Ten. They'll be battling with Ohio State, and Indiana this year will be battling with Oregon and Ohio State for Big Ten supremacy, and I think it'll be the same potentially in years to come. That's why this is historic. We are seeing a new great college football program emerge in Bloomington, Indiana, and Cignetti, I think, right now has the best coaching staff in America. Times have never been better, and they're only going to get better, I think, this year in Indiana. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I have to get these videos out. It's past 10, and I want to get all these segments out really before the night ends, and then be able to, like, take an hour, maybe 2-hour break, go to bed, wake up, and at some point tomorrow either go live or release a bunch of segments for tomorrow and Friday. So thank you guys for tuning in. I do see this comment from an Oregon fan that I do want to highlight. I don't think Ole Miss and Tennessee are better than Washington and USC. I agree on the USC part. I think a healthy USC is better than Tennessee and Ole Miss. I do. Washington, well, maybe you're onto something there. I don't know, but then again, depth isn't just the upper echelon of teams. Do you think that, for example, do you think that Purdue is better than Mississippi State? Or do you think that, like, Texas A&M is like third in SEC power ratings? Is it a given that at the end of the year A&M will be worse than Indiana or Oregon? I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, look, as I've said, I still think the SEC is better, but I do recognize that if there is a graph, it's hard to do this with two opposable like fingers that are pointing in opposite directions. So maybe this will be helpful, even though it's like painful for my wrist. If you're looking at a trend line, say the SEC's, this, the Big Ten is hello, this, and they're trending, the Big Ten is catching up. And I think anyone with a brain can see that. Part of that's because Nick Saban's gone from the SEC. It's probably the biggest factor. But the second biggest factor is that the Big Ten with NIL can now routinely outspend the SEC in recruiting. They can outspend to retain their rosters. And I also think that, like, the SEC got obsessed with beating Saban and just trying to, like... The SEC got too conditioned by that era, and they kept trying to be, like, the second best program because they all knew in the back of their heads they couldn't be Alabama. So instead of trying to be the next Alabama, they were trying to live in Saban's shadow but be the best part of his shadow. Without Saban in the Big Ten, even with Ohio State being more dominant than Alabama in the SEC because the SEC was much better, I think the Big Ten, like with D'Antonio at MSU, D'Antonio wanted to take control of the Big Ten. He wanted to. And he acted on it, and he acted like it. And I just don't get the sense, like with Ed Orgeron at LSU, they were never going to do that. They were never going to become this consistent power. With, like, Gene Chizik at Auburn or Gus Malzahn at Auburn, they were never going to do that. With Mullen at Florida, never going to do that. The only other team in the SEC that tried to replicate what Saban did, the only one, was Georgia. That was it. So those were really the only teams fighting for supremacy. The only ones. And I think that in the Big Ten, Ohio State did it for the longest time. Michigan State briefly under D'Antonio did, but then he fizzled out. Then Michigan under Harbaugh. That's why they brought Harbaugh home. They wanted to win it all. Didn't initially. Kept him around probably a little bit too long because he was a Michigan man, but eventually they got there. Penn State then saw that and said, oh, bleep. Okay, we can do this. So they went all in. Completely failed. They fired Franklin. Now they're trying to pursue that. Oregon getting Lanning. Lanning is a Saban and Smart disciple. He is doing what he learned. And Oregon joins the Big Ten. USC is a blue blood who hired Riley for the mission of winning titles. So a large part of it's conference realignment too. What Michigan did was unique because Michigan did not have Centennial QB talent and they were barely above the BCR, and yet they still won it all. So that gave some other teams that were not top 5 in recruiting hope that, okay, we can do this. That spurned hope in a lot of Big Ten teams who don't recruit like the SEC, but like Michigan do a better job than the SEC of retaining players. So I think that Ohio State still being elite under Day and actually leveling up compared to Meyer, but yet Michigan being able to beat that leveled up version of OSU, that kind of spurned a chain reaction in the Big Ten where a lot of programs in the Big Ten, not the majority of them, because the SEC I think still cares more, but a lot of Big Ten programs looked around and said, wait, so you're telling me Ohio State's better than they ever have been, and yet they're not dominating the Big Ten because someone stepped up? Well, why can't that be us? And I think that's what Penn State did. And then Oregon and USC, even if the Pac-12 stayed alive, I just think from a mindset and donor standpoint, they wanted to get there anyway. They wanted to be in the Pac-12 what Alabama and Ohio State and Georgia and, at the time they were hired, Michigan was becoming in the SEC and Big Ten respectively. But then those teams joined the Big Ten, while in the Big 12, Oklahoma, while they probably want to be there, with Nagy and Venables is never going to get there. Texas is trying to get there. So the Big Ten adds 2 teams that are trying to reach national title utopia. They have one in Michigan who's tasted it and doesn't want to go back. They already have one in Ohio State who's been there, has been there for eons, does not want to leave. Penn State wants to join. USC wants to join. Oregon's kind of there. They just haven't won it all yet. That's like 5. Those are 5 teams that are searching for being the apex thing. And based on recruiting moves and the current trends of the program, or like the 2020s, can actually get there. For the SEC, you have Alabama, you have Georgia. Texas is kind of like Oregon, although honestly, like after this year, Oregon is probably past Texas. Like they've recruited better on the O-line. They're recruiting a higher caliber of player slightly, and they haven't had the disastrous season that Texas is having right now. And Oregon should have had that season because they were a year behind Texas in roster building, and up until really the past 2 years, they were recruiting behind Texas. Yet they're outperforming them. Part of that schedule, part of that I think is that Dante Moore was, better trained, equipped, and evaluated than Manning was for a variety of reasons. Stuff happens. And then the only other program in the SEC who I would say is in that national title mix could be A&M, but we'd really have to see the breakthrough first. Especially since a lot of their blue chip recruits left after Fisher, so they have more of like a 50 to 60% BCR roster now than a 70-80%, and they haven't proven it yet. The other team that I would actually put in that spot's LSU, but they're not going to get there under Kelly. It's not going to work. So as of right now, there is a higher percentage of the Big Ten who I think is going to be in that title hunt compared to the SEC over the next coming years. But the SEC, when you take out those top national title programs, there are more teams in the SEC that can realistically win a playoff game than teams in the Big Ten. Big Ten's more top-heavy. They have better teams, and I would even argue better programs at the top. SEC is just top-down a better conference. Hopefully, very long-winded, but hopefully that gives like some insight on my opinions on that type of stuff. If Oregon and Indiana rematches in the playoffs, who wins? Let's say it's a neutral site. Oh. That's tough. I'm going to go with Indiana. If it's the second time, if they match up 3 times, I couldn't pick Indiana to beat Oregon 3 times because they're close enough together. But I do think that like Sig's a better coach than Lanning, and Indiana, at least as of right now, still has the better roster. So I'd pick Indiana. I did have Oregon beating Indiana in my playoff bracket earlier this week, and that was with Oregon having a rematch with Oregon and Indy and beating them. So like third time's a charm was kind of the logic behind that. But if this is, if this is a rematch, neutral field, I'll probably go with Indiana. Ohio State could be a GOAT team, but my worry is when the defense is an off game, if the offense is able to pick up the slack and win a shootout type game. I wouldn't be worried about that. Maybe I'm. I mean, as much as I don't think Ohio State's unanimously number 1 right now in power ratings, like in terms of how the AP poll works, traditionally they should be unanimously number 1. Ohio State, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't be too worried about it. I think it is a worry that they haven't really been challenged in like their down way, and they have to get up and they have to like really get their act together to just win, not dominate. But at the same time, like, it's Ryan Day. You have elite receivers. Your rushing attack, by your standards, is porous. But Alabama, who I think is a national title contender, also has a porous like run game by their standards. It just I don't know what it is with those two teams, but there's something on those offensive lines that is not clicking for whatever reason, along with the running backs. But Ohio State's defense is really, 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 really good. And maybe I'm an idiot for saying this, but like Ohio State won it all last year. They're bringing back a lot of the offense next year. They might even bring back Patricia next year. Might bring back Hartline. Like they might bring back the majority of people. If Ohio State like wins 11 games and doesn't win it all, the season I think is like, yeah, like check the box. You did it. That was my opinion preseason, and I'm honestly not changing it. The reason I'm not changing it is because Ohio State looks better than I thought they would defensively. They're about the same that I thought offensively, but also the average offense they've played so far this year is worse than I thought. Like, Texas sucks. I did not think they'd suck offensively. The Penn State game doesn't matter. Like, as long as Ohio State doesn't overlook them, they will win by 2 scores at minimum, and that's probably being a bit conservative. I trust Day. Like, they're going to be in the hunt. If they do get down, they'll find a way to make it competitive and have a shot to win. Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing Ohio State needs for this year, the last thing they need outside of another game where they lose to Michigan, not because it's a good game and Michigan ends up winning because Michigan's good, but because they run a bad game plan against Michigan again, and it's like, it's the second year in a row, and after Mitchell Melton's comments, you learned nothing, is that would be bad. But outside of that, the last thing I think Ohio State needs is for people to say that the defense was a failure because they gave up 27 points in a game and lost like 21-27. That is the last thing I think Ohio State needs. The expectations surrounding Ohio State have always been high. They always will be high. But it feels like the expectations are only rising, while the current trend of college football suggests that after Caleb Downs and Arvell Reese and Jeremiah Smith, like, they could field a 10-2 team that looks, great, but to the Ohio State fan is just average. I don't know if I'm making any sense at all, but I think that Ohio State fans should just enjoy the ride. There was this guy on Twitter who I've had some back and forths with, and him and I have disagreed on a lot because, I think that he sometimes is like way too pro Ohio State and doesn't only comes out and is only confident and talkative when they're good and seems to be pretty quiet when they do something bad, like that type of fan. But I was in agreement with him today that, he was like, people are just doubting my team. They discredit us when we win. We haven't lost yet. We're reigning national champs. I'm just enjoying the ride. That's what Ohio State fans should be. Like, yes, there are things that need improvement, but you should enjoy the ride. You should. In this new era, to go 11-1 regular season, regardless of the schedule, is pretty cool. To go 12-0 is absolutely phenomenal, and Ohio State's going one of those. They're not going anything worse than that. To win your conference and get a bye is going to be the epitome of being elite, and Ohio State is the favorite to do that right now. To win the title and go 16-0 will be a feat that most will not be able to accomplish, and Ohio State's favored to do that. So, pissed off Ohioan and all Ohio State fans listening to this, and I'll mention this in my video tomorrow about the team, enjoy the ride. Like, do not be mad. You just won it all. You have a phenomenal defense. You get to witness Jeremiah Smith play for your team. You get to witness Julian Sayin be incredible. Do not be mad. Do not be mad. Don't do it. Do not let other fan bases steal your joy. Don't do it. Okay. That's it for today. Thank you guys for watching. I'm going to get these videos out and see you guys